That's about security controls. Security controls is the way to achieving the security and to achieve the or preserve confidentiality, integrity, and availability. And as we mentioned, controls can come in many forms, not only technical, but could be also physical. And the control cost need to be justified and need to be relevant to the assets that we are trying to protect. So security controls can avoid, can detect, and can minimize security risk to an asset. And the security controls can be something technical and non-technical, and we can classify security controls to many types. There are some types of security controls that can be used before the attack from being happened, such as controls such as security cameras, monitoring system. These type of controls are used to detect the attack. That's why it is categorized as controls that can be used before the attack. We have controls that can be used during the attack, such as the detective control as well. It can detect the attack while it is happening, and also it can prevent or limit the attack itself, which in this case could be a preventive. Controls also can be corrective or used after the attack, and the goal of corrective control is to limit the damage or recover, such as restoring backup after being subject to a ransomware attack. In this case, backup and recovery could be categorized as a corrective control. So controls are not only a technical, it can be also something related to administrative control, such as policies, procedures, can be also something physical. So in this slide, we will discuss what is the difference between policy, standard, procedures, and guideline. So could you give me an example, or what is your view for what do we mean by policy or standard? Policy document that we use in our organization or in our business? So policy is targeting the people to make them aware about their duty. Is that what we are trying to explain? Yeah, so that's right. Policy gave information about what is the preferred action or what is the good action. Standard provides a way for how to achieve this action. For example, in our policy, we could have a requirement that tells everyone should have a strong password. And this password should be changed in regular interval, every 90 days, every 30 days, whatever, right? But the statement inside the policy is too generic, which means we said we need a strong password, but we didn't provide the criteria of how strong password should look like. We said we need to change the password on regular interval. However, we didn't provide information about what do we mean by regular. Do you mean every month, every week, every year? So policy provide like a high level intention. It tells why we need to have a good security to achieve our objective. It identify what is required. But standard provide a way for to how to achieve what is required. So standard is another document, and in some situations we can find the policy and the standard as the same document, but standard at the end will define to you what do we mean by strong password. Password should not be least or less than 8 characters, should include capital and small and special characters, numbers as well, should be changed every 90 days. You should have multi-factor authentication already in place. So standards are a tool that provide how to achieve policy requirements. On other hand, we have another document called the procedures. And procedures is like a detailed step-by-step guide for how to make a certain task, such as you has a policy that say password should be strong. You has a standard or you have a standard that tells you what is the required parameter in password that make it strong. For procedures, I create like a document guide to users instructing them for how to change their password in a step-by-step form. Okay? So why do may need to separate policy document and standard document? And this is a strategic question. Why do we need to keep both of these documents isolated or different documents? Policy by its nature is a document that are not frequently changed. So every year I should review the policy, of course, to ensure that policy requirements are still relevant to my business requirements. Okay? But every year the type of secure protocols or type of required security standards may change. So I do only want every year to review the policy and reapprove it from management. But I don't need to edit inside the policy document. So that's why I create the standard document, and in the standard document, I provide the required standard as it is from technical perspective. So policy could not be changed for 3 or 5 years, example, because it will include a generic term that will be relevant all the time, like policy should be strong. That's enough. But the standard could be reviewed every 6 months, every year, could be updated every year to map the technology challenges or the new security requirements. That's why we may differentiate or separate the policy and the standard document. Because if you got the standard inside the policy, your policy document will be subject to frequent change every year. Because if you can remember when I was differentiating between secure and insecure protocols, I said that everything is subject to change. Correct? So here is like what we talked about the policy and standards. So policy in general define overall responsibility and support. It should be approved by management, should be simple and easy to be understood. It should to have like a long-term statement such as policy must be strong, but we don't define what are the criteria that we can assess and measure based on it. Standard, on other hand, is a mid-level document and it is usually supported and created by information security department or security department because in most cases standards include security requirements. So standard tells you what are the criteria that we can based on it measure if the password is strong or not. So it can include some low-level details and it can be changed whenever a new need happens. Procedures, on other hand, is a low level and it is a detailed step-by-step guide and it explains to you how to do something in a manner that is consistent and a manner that help you in doing this task without any issue. Guidelines, on other hand, is another type of document, but guidelines is unlike standard procedures and policy. It is not a mandatory document. Remember, policy specify the top management requirements. Why do we need to do this? To keep our environment secure, so you should have a strong password. Compliance with the policy is mandatory. You should comply with the policy, right? What about the standard? Should I comply with the standard? Sure, because standard provide instructions about how to comply with the policy, but from quantifiable measure, what you should have in place. What about the procedures? Should I comply with procedure? Yeah, sure. But what about guidelines? Guidelines is only the optional document. For example, I could create a strong password that comply with the requirements. I have capital and small, I have characters, and I have special characters. So this password could be A capital, PC, at from 1 to 9. Doesn't this policy comply with the standard? Or doesn't this password comply with the standard? It have all the requirements, but it is somehow easy to be guessed by anyone. So guidelines can provide extra guidance for how to achieve the standard in a good way. So we can find like in security awareness a guideline that tells you that your password need to be easy to be remembered by you, but hard to be guessed by anybody else. So you will not need to write it on the text, on the note, and leave it in the office or store it in a safe, for example. And the guidelines also as a term include other criteria as well. We may have like a guidelines for how to configure our Windows systems in a secure way, such as guideline documents or benchmark document called the CIS guidelines. Are you familiar with CIS guidelines, by the way? Okay, so CIS guidelines is like a hardening documents maintained by Center of Internet Storm. I believe this is the correct name because I miss the definitions a lot nowadays. So CIS standard, we will look for this website and we will have CIS benchmark, Center of Internet Security, not Storm. I don't know where. So CIS benchmark provide like hardening documents for many types of operating system. And what do we mean by hardening, if you can recall this term from yesterday class? Hardening is something such as removing default accounts, removing default settings, removing unused or unneeded services, right? So part of the hardening for the system, for example, is if you found the SSH is enabled, that's okay. But if you found the telnet, please disable it, right? So hardening document can be downloaded from that could provide to you like a guideline for how to do system hardening for any type of operating system. You can download it from CIS. For example, if you are using Windows 10, you could have like a hardening document for Windows 10, but it is in Tune, which is related to Microsoft Azure, Microsoft Office. If you install SQL, SharePoint, web browser like Edge, desktop, you could have like a benchmark for how to configure this benchmark or configure your desktop in a secure way. So usually when you download this bookmark, I will try just to write some data in order to download this document and show you how it looks like. So I will write just my personal details. So I filled my data and then I will submit get the benchmark. And then they told me that you will get the message from us on your inbox. So I will just wait to receive this file. But at the end, I should have like access to the document that I was trying to download. Just making sure if I received it or not. They also have an interesting option. If you, in case you are using cloud, you can download pre-hardened image. For example, if you are using Microsoft Azure Cloud Platform or Oracle Cloud and you need to install Windows or Linux, you can go to Azure Marketplace and you can download like a pre-hardened or a software image for Windows, for example, and it already include all required hardening configurations as per as their guide. So I didn't receive the guide yet, but at the end, the guide would include all required configurations, all the changes needed in the registry key in order to make your system or make your device secure and comply with the security requirements. Okay. Okay, so I can send you this link so you can have a look to it. Maybe you will be maybe more lucky and able to download this hardened guide, and it may act as like a source that based on it you could create a baseline for security requirements in your client's operating system, for example. So here is just like an explanation for what is the relation between policy, standard, and control. Policy and the standard are like the governance and management tools, such as constitution and law, while controls is the way to enforce these controls. So policies and the standards are at the end the type of controls, but without the existence of technical controls, we will not be able to achieve the policy requirements from technical perspective, or in other words, from a technical way to make it enforced and applied. Controls can be classified to preventive, detective, and corrective. And preventive control is a control or a type of security control that can prevent the bad activity, while detective control is a type of control that can detect, such as the logging, such as the security cameras. It helps us to detect the intrusion. So in that case, it could be categorized as a detective control. Corrective control is a type of control that can help us to restore back the system, such as backup and recovery. This is an example for the corrective control. So security controls in action, we remember all of this chart earlier, right? We saw it yesterday. So we have the threat actor who is using threats to create an attack, and this attack aims to exploit a vulnerability on an asset. And by successful exploitation, we could cause an impact that could related to confidentiality, integrity, and availability. Do we remember this part? So how security controls can work here? Security controls can be deterrent controls, which means controls that if the hacker saw it or know about its existence, he will might think twice before conducting this attack. This might not be relevant from IT perspective, but let's take an example of physical security and security camera. If the thief found that the building is secured by security guards and different layers of security, he will be less motivated to do this attack. That's why we may call some types of controls are deterrent controls. From technical perspective, we may find warning banner or login banner is a kind of deterrent control. Login banner is something like this. When you log into a server or an application, you may find like a message or warning message that tells you that this system is protected and monitored, and access should be only for authorized individual. And if you don't have the permission to access this system, please log out of the system. This is what we call as a login banner or login message. And login message can act as a deterrent control, because if the hacker found that there is a clear instruction that if you don't have the authority to access the system, you need to log off, he might think to leave the system, by the way. But I'm not talking about hacker specifically, but I'm talking about user who may gain unauthorized access to the system in a wrong way. So he needs to be notified that in case he is not authorized, please shut down the system or quit from this session. Another type of control is the detective control, and we mentioned all before detective controls can be used to detect the attack. Detective control has another function, which is to trigger or notify the preventive control. From technical perspective, I cannot illustrate it right now, but I could discuss it from the physical security perspective as well. Like smoke detector. What is the smoke detector? Right. And what is the goal of a smoke detector? Only to detect the smoke? So it can also trigger the response by notifying the preventive team or automating the file suppression mechanism. So detective controls can detect and also can trigger the response. So preventive control can come and protect this vulnerability or reduce the impact or prevent the impact by suppressing the source of the fire, for example. In case attack was successful or the fire took some of the assets or something like this, we should have the corrective control that could limit this impact. Corrective control can be something such as disaster recovery plan, which will allow us to restore our business back but from a different facility. Could be backup and restore to restore the lost data and all of this stuff. Okay? So this is the relation between different kind of security controls in terms of how attack is happening. Some controls can be used before the attack. Some controls can be used during the attack. Some controls can be used to prevent or limit the damage of the attack. And some controls can be used to restore the system back after the attack or keep the business running. We have also some other controls such as segregation of duty, such as least privilege, such as HR background check. And the least privilege can help us if we can remember when we were talking about how to secure against malware, that malware can be secured by anti-malware, by security awareness, and also by limiting the user privilege. So if the user was able to download a malware, he will not be able to activate it in case it require a kind of installation. So least privilege could be also a type of control, but this control is somehow not related to technical, but it is maybe an organizational or HR or administrative control. So let's have some question related to the part of the controls. Then we can go to another break. Yeah, preventive control, no, not B, because preventive control is not less expensive. In reality, preventive control are controls that can help you in reducing the impact or preventing the intrusion. It can prevent the attack. C. Preventive control stop unwanted event from occurring, while detective control only records them. So detective controls can only tell you that there is an intrusion, while preventive control can actually tell you that there is an intrusion, and also it can stop this intrusion, such as antivirus software. It is a preventive control. That's right. This is another description or another synonym to the corrective control. So let's discuss some of the examples that could control against specific threat. Cross-site scripting or injection attacks in the web. How or what is the type of security control that can secure our environment against web application attacks? We have a lot of examples such as firewall, we have WAF, web application firewall, we have anti-DDoS gateway or anti-DDoS solution, we have antivirus, we have IPS, we have security awareness. All of this may be a types of security controls. Which of it could secure against the cross-site scripting? That's right, web application firewall. And the difference between firewall and web application firewall is if we can recall the OSI model. As I mentioned earlier, OSI model is very important concept in security and understanding how things work. Normal firewall can usually reach or read up to this layer. So it can block or deny based on destination port. So you may set a firewall policy that deny anybody to communicate using port 23, which is related to telnet, with a specific server. But web application firewall is able to inspect up to the application header. So it can detect if someone is trying to inject a malicious code or a malicious script in the web request or not, and prevent this. So WAF can understand up to layer 7. We have firewalls, by the way, that can understand up to layer 7, which are called next generation firewalls. But WAF is the one that is specialized to counter the web attacks, such as cross-site scripting, for example. Okay? Exploitation of system vulnerability. We can use intrusion prevention system. Intrusion prevention system is a system or a hardware or a software tool that monitor the existing vulnerability and check if there is someone is trying to exploit it. In our design, when we were talking about a website that we were scanning using our Kali machine, if we have here in between, we got like IPS device, which can be, by the way, part of the firewall. We usually have the IPS module activated on firewall. So the inspection done this way. Traffic enter firewall, go to IPS checking, then exit from the firewall. So IPS is such a feature that can be found on firewall nowadays. So if we got an IPS exist, IPS could be able to detect that there is someone trying to exploit the VSFTPD application based on certain parameters in the request. So IPS can block this action and protect against the exploitation. Okay? Phishing. How can we protect against the phishing emails? User awareness can be a protection measure against the phishing email. This is like administrative control, but also we can have anti-spam gateway, which is a kind of firewall, but is specialized in detecting spam messages and block it. Okay? Ransomware. That's right. The only available option that may be a cost effective is having backup available. We have another technique to counter ransomware, which is called the sandbox technology or sandbox device. Have you heard about sandbox before? And what is the goal of sandbox? Because the definition of sandbox changes from someone to someone else. So sandbox in developing means a system that we can test our code on it to ensure that our code is working or not. That from the application developing perspective. Fine. But in cybersecurity, we have a tools or a hardware called sandbox. And in this sandbox, we have some virtual machines. What do I mean by virtual machine? A machine such as what we have here that we were playing with. Fine. Each of this machine has a different operating system, such as one has Windows 7, one has Windows 10, one has Mac operating system, and we may find another one which run Windows 10 and have Office version 2010, and other one Windows 10 has Windows Office version 12,016, and all of this stuff. And this sandbox device is connected with the devices or the antivirus server. So whenever any user download a suspicious or a new file from the internet, this file will be denied from execution. It cannot be opened by the user until the user send it in automatic way to the antivirus server, and the antivirus server send it to the sandbox device. The sandbox will run this file on all of these systems together and check what could be the difference between before running this application or this file on these systems and after running this application, this file. The result will be something like this. This file, when it executed, it tried to access restricted system area, or tried to modify something in the registry, or tried to make external communication with suspicious IP address to download a malware. Okay? And this report will be reported back to antivirus, and based on that, antivirus will instruct the device that downloaded this file to block this file and not open it and remove it, as well as updating the rest of the network that in case anybody saw this file, do not consider it as a virus. We have in our antivirus or in our antivirus solutions right now, for me, I'm using an antivirus that is based on Fortinet technology. And this antivirus has like an option. And this option for the antivirus. So this is the antivirus. I can see here an option. So here I have an option in my antivirus to link it with a sandbox server. I will show you this option. So simply, if I have subscription from Fortinet, I can link my antivirus with IP address of a sandbox system. And in case my device saw a suspicious or unknown file, it will send this file to the sandbox, and I can ask my device to wait until I get the result from sandbox before allowing it to be executed. Okay? Sandbox is very costly solution. That's why it is not always a cost effective, and it costs organization a lot of money, but it can help in detecting ransomware attacks because it tests the file before it be on a sandbox machines or test machines before users will be allowed to open this file. However, threat actors and people who are developing ransomwares are creating ways to detect if they are being tested in a sandbox or not. For example, malware or ransomware code include like parameters that check for the existence of USB connected devices, for example. So if I am working on a real device, I should have in the device manager information about connected USB mouse or connected USB keyboard, right? This will not be the case in the sandbox virtual machines because at the end they are virtual. So ransomware, when it will not found that there is a USB device connected, that will mean it is being inspected. So it will stop execution and it will do nothing malicious. So it will be allowed to be executed on real device. And as a result, what would happen here? Yeah. So there are controls, but not also effective. And as a malicious actor develop the ransomware to work in a smart way, the people who develop the sandbox solutions are working the same. They also try to counter these techniques in identification of the sandbox system. Okay. Malware, how to detect it? I believe antivirus. DOS attack, firewall, right? Correct? What about DDoS attack? Okay, the answer is quite hard. A few days ago, I read like a news about that F5, which is a security service manufacturer, creating or launching DDoS scrubbing centers in Sydney and Melbourne. So they are creating like a huge data center with a huge bandwidth capacity and bandwidth requirements, and they install devices on the service provider locations. And whenever these devices sense that we have a traffic that could be potentially participating in DDoS attack, these devices will forward this traffic to other location, and then this traffic will be discarded. And only traffic that is not participating in DDoS attack will be allowed to move or reach the website. Complicated, yes? Yeah, so just to make it more clear to you, the concept of anti-DDoS protection is we, for example, utilize a service such as Cloudflare, DDoS protection. For some websites, when you try to open this website, for example, I'm not recalling a particular website, but I will look for Cloudflare DDoS protection message. You might be browsing the internet and then you got this message. Have you encountered this message before? Some websites utilize anti-DDoS protection from a company called Cloudflare. When you open this website, you first are not redirected to the website. You first will be redirected to a data center related to the provider or the one who providing the anti-DDoS protection. This one have a kind of capability that detect the nature of your request. Is it a random request or requesting a specific resource at this website? Is your IP address is considered a clean IP or has been reported that it is a source of cyber attacks? What is the agent type of your web browser? Is it based on Windows, Linux, or is it based on a smart TV on a Chromecast device? Do you remember yesterday when I told you that DDoS attacks are not only sourced from computers, but also from smart home devices? So any device that is asking to reach a certain website, he send a request header, HTTP header. In this HTTP header, it includes the user agent information. User agent information is something like this. In the request itself, I declare what is the type of my browser or type of my web browser. So the Cloudflare or similar techniques that work as anti-DDoS protection or provide the anti-DDoS capability will look for such parameters, for example. To detect who is requesting this resource, is he looks like a good one or a bad one? Is he a normal computer device or is he like, let's say, a web browser or a smart device that could be infected and trying to make like a DDoS attack and all of this information. So that's why you may encounter this message. This message is like allowing some time for the anti-DDoS prevention to check and ensure you are a good traffic, not a bad traffic. Okay? And after confirming that you are a good one, you will be redirected to the real what? Website. You will be asked to go to this one. Okay, we informed that you are clean. You can proceed to the website that you had requested. But what if this traffic was part of DDoS attack? This application or this website will forward this traffic to, as you read in the news, scrapping website. What do we mean by scrapping in English? Yeah, it is like a data center that ready to receive a lot of amount of the traffic, a huge quantity of traffic, but we will not do anything by this traffic. We will discard it. So we just send it to a high performance site with a high bandwidth speed for nothing but to absorb this attack, while keeping the targeted server is already safe and the DDoS traffic is not reaching it. Fine. So this is like the information that just I show you. What is anti-DDoS? What is the user agent? An example for anti-DDoS protection by a company called the Cloudflare. Of course, we have a lot of anti-DDoS protection mechanism or vendors, but anti-DDoS solutions is very costly as well, because it requires a lot of techniques and a lot of hardware to absorb such attacks. And no one can host anti-DDoS protection mechanism in his own data center, because anti-DDoS can utilize the bandwidth, right? So we need to put the anti-DDoS protection tools outside or before reaching our own network. It can be placed at the service provider side, not in our side. Fine? Okay. So the next part that we are going to discuss is about risk management. So